Hi, AICE Lang. I'm Miss Gilbert.
I'm Mrs. Bernstein.
And we are here to talk to you today to give you kind of an introduction to the novel that we're going to be studying together, Ian McEwan's Atonement. So you can expect to kind of see us go over some of the major things that you need to know, some of the things that are going to help you in your study of the novel, and we're going to do this together because we pretty much have a shared curriculum. So this is the type of thing that you guys can expect to see us do kind of throughout the year. So hopefully this will catch and keep your attention. We'll see. But get ready. Let's talk about Atonement. Okay, so we're going to start our discussion of Atonement by actually telling you a little bit about Ian McEwan. So he was born on June 21st, 1948 in the United Kingdom. He traveled actually a whole bunch. He spent a lot of his childhood not actually in the UK. He moved around a whole bunch. He lived in East Asia, he lived in Germany, he lived in North Africa. And so his father was a major in the army, so hence all of the moving around. He was, however, educated, especially for his post-secondary education. He was educated in the UK. He went to the University of Sussex, where he got a degree in English literature, and then he attended the University of East Anglia and got a master's in English literature as well. He is married to a journalist and writer, and they currently live in London. So unlike a lot of our other authors, Ian McEwan's still around. He is still writing, and still, he's publishing new books all the time. So we're looking at contemporary literature here. And so speaking of which, he is, like we said, an English novelist and also a screenwriter. He's won a ton of awards. He's very well known, not just in the UK, but globally. Atonement was written in 2001, so just to give you a little bit of context for that as far as when it first came out. And Atonement is an award-winning novel. It won the W.H. Smith Literary Award in 2002. But it is not set in contemporary times. So one of the things that we're going to talk about in just a moment is the historical background of Atonement, and we're going to be thinking particularly about 1935 England and also World War II.
So now that you have heard a little bit about the writer himself, you can see that there is some historical background that he pulls into his novel based on his experiences through, having his father who was a part of, the army as well, and he became a major by the end of his career. So it is set into 3 periods over the course of the novel. It covers 1935 England, and then it moves into World War II, both in England and in France, followed by present-day England, and the novel ends in 1999, where you discover who the actual narrator of the entire story is. Some other things that you need to understand regarding the novel, and these are some things that we will discuss as we move forward into Socratic seminars, some passage analysis, and some other things that we will be doing with this novel. One of the most important things surrounding this whole novel is the mistake and the decision that is made by one of the characters that ruins many lives. And through the course of the novel, she's basically atoning for what she has done, and she is reflecting on the choices that she's made. And you then find out, her adulthood, and that's the, grievous mistake that she has made. In addition to that, you will be reading some historical content about World War II, the effects that war has on the soldiers, on prisoners of war, and as well as the nurses, and the effect that war has on humanity.
One of the things that we have to make sure that we deal with, and that McEwan points out to us over and over again throughout this text, is this idea that characters, and then of course above and beyond that humanity, we aren't one-sided. We are not, singular or static people. And so he asks us to deal with this idea of complexity, right? And so one of the quotes that I think really exemplifies this is this quote that we've pulled here. It says, "It wasn't only wickedness and scheming that made people unhappy, it was confusion and misunderstanding. Above all, it was the failure to grasp the simple truth that other people are as real as you. And only in a story could you enter these different minds and show how they had an equal value. That was the only moral a story need have." So the idea of who's telling the story and who's creating the narrative. This is something that we are going to talk about both in AICE Lang right now, and also that will move into AICE literature next year. So thinking about the structure of this story, and then how the narrative is actually created and generated, and who's telling who what stories, and the order in which those stories are presented, that's going to be an important part of understanding not just the text that we're looking at, but in also dealing with the complexities of the text and also the complexities of our own selves.
In addition to that complexity, you have to consider the characters that are in the story and the relationships that they have with one another. So as you can see, we have grouped here the main characters, and this is not the entire list, by family and some of the major important roles that these characters have that take place in the novel. In addition to that, you want to make sure that you consider all the relationships and the connections that these characters have, and the connections that they may have with other characters in the story as well, and that the characters are very complex by nature. What they do, how they interact with each other, the choices and the decisions they make, and how those choices and decisions they make affect the other characters in the story as well. So the characters are also very complex. When you are looking and considering all the characters and the choices they make, once you've established that, you're also starting to look at the themes that come up in the novel. And there are a variety of themes. Literature does not just have one theme, and as we've already discussed, a theme is not one word. So as you see on this list, it's very broad, and there is just one word up there. But you have to consider, what is the author trying to say about perspective? About how we as individuals, not just the characters, but as we as human beings look at things in the world and how that affects our choices that we make in life. The idea of remorse and guilt, what does that mean? What does that look like for the character, the narrator in fact, and how does she try to atone for that? So not just looking at these as, just a one word, but really kind of establishing what is the writer saying about this. And that's through the characters and their relationships. That's through the stylistic choices that the writer makes. And how are we, how does the writer tell us about these particular things? With social class, part of what happens with the choices, the choice that one of the characters makes has to do with that, societal class in, British society. Both the innocence of a character and then the loss of it, and other things that involve that. And then when you get to the, the World War II aspect of things, what is the writer saying about war and the injustices that go alongside that? And then obviously this is definitely a coming of age identity situation as well.
The other thing that we want to think about when we're thinking about those major ideas like theme, we want to think about how the writer communicates that to us. And so the stylistic choices are one of the ways that the writer conveys those themes and conveys those major ideas. And so what we have here are things that you should look at and think about as we're looking at and looking at the passages, looking at the text as a whole. We want to pay attention to things like allusion, to things like irony, where do we see that, to things like diction, word choice, as well as tone. And remember, tone is the speaker's attitude towards the subject. We want to look at the groups of imagery that the author is creating and how those groups of images either complement or contrast each other. We want to think about motifs. What are some repeated ideas that we see come up over and over again? And then we also want to think about figurative language, all of the different comparisons that McEwan is making. And then also symbolism. What are some of the major symbols that we can talk about and think about as we continue to study Atonement? McEwan's writing style. We need to deal with a couple of these ideas in order to make sure that we are that we're understanding the narrative that McEwan is setting up. So the first thing we want to think about is point of view. And so what we have is a narrative where we have a shifting point of view, and it's a shifting third person point of view. So that means that basically different characters are telling us different parts of the story. And then we have a shift at the end, right? Where we read the epilogue, and the epilogue moves from a third person point of view to a first person point of view that reveals the narrator to us. And it reveals the truth. But notice the truth has some question marks behind it, right? Because we have to think about, well, in this case, like, is this truth? Is our narrator reliable? Is truth subjective or flawed? You'll notice a ton of question marks because we are not left in this text with a feeling of finality. We are left with a feeling of questioning, right? Where we question, well, what do we know and what do we not know and how do we know it? And do we believe it? That's a big thing as well. So this kind of complicated narration, the question we should be asking ourselves about this complicated narration is, what is the effect of this? Why does McEwan do this? What is the purpose of this complicated narration? And to kind of finish that up again with this idea of detailed and descriptive writing, tons of imagery. So please pay attention to that. When you see those complexes of images come up, make sure that you're paying attention to those. Make sure that you're paying attention. We've just talked about how the point of view is going to shift. Make sure that you talk about where you see those shifts and why you think those shifts happen in these particular places. And of course, we're talking about complex characters. We've mentioned that already. But we need to make sure that we pay attention to our kind of triangle, our characters whose lives are kind of influenced and intertwined, and this misperception that entwines them, and this misperception that kind of follows them and changes the trajectory of their lives and their narratives.
Okay, so we're coming to the end now. So, but at the beginning of the book, and this is very important, and these are some things that cannot be skipped over when you're reading a novel, and it's something called an epigraph. There's also an epigram, and there's a bunch of other types of things. But an epigraph is a quote that's at the beginning of a literary work. And it's very important that we always read these things that are at the beginning of a novel. If you're going to be reading The Handmaid's Tale next year, there are 3 of them at the beginning of that novel. And the purpose of an author using a quote at the beginning of a literary work is because it is getting the reader to start thinking about the themes, the concepts, and it often establishes the tone as well. So it gets the reader thinking about what's going to be happening in the book before the reader even starts reading the actual novel itself. So this is a quote taken from Jane Austen's novel that was written in 1817. And fun fact, Jane Austen is one of Miss Bernstein's favorite writers. And in this particular novel, and when you're reading this quote, the character, the 2 main characters they're parallel, the one from Atonement and the one from Jane Austen's novel. And in this, Catherine has fabricated, some melodramatic fantasies in her mind, and they cause a mess. So in this quote that you have hopefully read, and if you haven't, please make sure that you go back and read it and consider it, because it really does illustrate, some of the things that happen in the novel. So the main character one of the main characters in Jane Austen's novel, Catherine, she decides that her boyfriend's father has imprisoned or murdered his wife, okay? But this is not true. And then her boyfriend basically calls her out on it. So it's a mistaken suspicion within the upper class community within the British society. So again, you have some of those parallels there as well. All right, so what's coming next? This is not all we're going to be doing with Atonement. You already had a quiz with Atonement, a short reading quiz, and then we will be moving into some Socratic seminars. So the purpose of this PowerPoint is for you to start thinking about some of the things that we will be discussing in our Socratic seminars. We will also be doing some passage analysis, talking about marking a text, which will also help prepare you for AICE Lit next year. And we'll be doing some other activities as well.
Okay, so now you should have a pretty good idea of what to think about and what to be expecting and what to be looking for as we continue our study of Atonement.
So as we move into these seminars, these are the things that you should be considering. And you do have an assignment that's going to be followed up with this fabulous PowerPoint. And if you did not take any notes on that PowerPoint, we highly recommend that you go back and take some of those notes or screenshot some of those things, because you are going to need to know those things as we move forward. And hi, Gilbert's kids.
Hi! How is everybody doing? This is my circle of friends. This is my safe place.
And then there she is. You can't ever get rid of Shepherd. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and please let us know if you have any questions, and we will see you soon.
Have a great weekend.